I've had over the years a number of people ask me, literally patients in the reception coming and asking about this problem, that problem, can you help? They said, oh, which one's better, chiro, osteo, physio? And why it's only those three that ever come up, but that's what it is. And I say the same thing that would include everyone from sports therapists to naturopaths to whatever, you name it, right? I like the mantra of there is no one better profession, just better professionals.
Welcome to the Radical Health Rebel podcast. I'm your host, Lee Brandon. This work started for me several decades ago when I started to see the impact I could make on people, helping them to identify the root cause of their health problems that no doctor could figure out, including serious back, knee, shoulder and neck injuries, acne and eczema issues, severe gut health problems, even helping couples get pregnant after several IVF treatments had failed. And it really moves me to be able to help people in this way. And that is why I do what I do and why we have this show. Welcome to this week's episode of the Radical Health Rebel podcast. I'm thrilled to bring you a conversation with a remarkable guest, Michael Shawe, the owner of Shawe Physio. Michael is a dedicated physiotherapist who has built a practice centered around understanding and addressing the root causes of his patients' pain. In our discussion, Michael shares his inspiring journey into the field of physiotherapy and provides insights into the client-centered methods he and his team employ at Shawe Physio. We dive deep into the various approaches they use to treat clients effectively, ensuring that each patient receives personalized care tailored to their specific needs. Michael also reveals the philosophies he incorporates in his clinic, offering valuable advice and tips that you won't want to miss. Whether you're a healthcare professional, a patient, or simply curious about physiotherapy, this episode is packed with information and engaging content. Stay tuned as we explore the world of physiotherapy with Michael Shawe and discover how his expertise and compassionate approach are making a difference in the lives of many. Michael Shawe, welcome to the Radical Health Rebel podcast. Thanks for coming on the show.
Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's good to have you on, Michael. So to kick things off, could you share your physiotherapy journey and what motivated you to become a physiotherapist?
My physio journey. I guess it starts probably all the way back when I was about 12 years old. I used to do chores and stuff for my nan, and one of the things she often asked me to do is give her neck and shoulders a bit of a rub. And I always remember her saying, "You've got magic hands, you have," and that kind of, I guess, stuck with me as the beginning point of what I consider to be my journey. That led into about 14 years old. We're on a ski holiday. My mum had a knee injury, and pretty much there and then during the trip, she had some surgery done, a kind of cartilage meniscal repair or trim under arthroscopy. And I saw the physios working with my mum, and it was only for a little while because we were only at tail end of the holiday. But I remember them saying, "Oh yeah, no, the job's great. I work 4 days a week, and the hospital pay for my ski pass." And I was like, "Oh, 14-year-old lad thinking, no, that's a job. I could do that." And then a year later, I injured my own knee playing rugby, and that was a pretty significant meniscal tear, partial ACL tear, and I had really bad Osgood Schlatters, and it sort of avulsed part of that as well. So then I had my own physio journey, as is more commonly the story for people who become physios, and was like, yeah, this is an interesting job. I'm sporty, I'm active, I'm really interested in the human body. Like, I was looking at anatomy books that were probably designed for uni level people when I was about 12, 13 years old. Wow. Just so innately curious about the human body. Compare that with then, being a very tactile young person, touch was always quite important to me, which, being in an all boys school, definitely got you a bit of a reputation. But, I went from playing rugby, being very physical, very interested in the body and sports, and then into uni. And it helped me channel because I always struggled quite a lot with hyperactivity as a kid, diagnosed with ADHD, as you'll probably tell throughout parts of this talk today. I can go off on one, and my brain works a bit 100 miles an hour. And my secondary school was able to really channel that once I had a focus, once I had a reason to study and pay attention. Certainly those subjects that related to my goal, I was suddenly a lot more focus on. And it aligned with a curious kid who loved asking why. I think my father was probably somewhat frustrated with numerous conversations of why. Why is the sky blue? Why does the wind blow? Why just anything? I was always curious.
Yeah. So what was some of the subjects you studied at school kind of with that goal in mind?
So I went to Richard Hale in Hartford, and I'm very thankful to that school. It definitely helped me out a lot, especially my head of year, Mr. Robbins, who kind of picked me up at an early age and was like, "Okay, let's get you channeled." GCSEs, we had 3 individual science classes. So even at GCSE, we were doing biology, psychology, and chemistry, probably physics and chemistry, all separated rather than just sciences.
Yeah.
And really the meaningful, I suppose, changes came in A levels. So A levels, I did biology, psychology, sports study, chemistry, and business studies. So I was of a time where you did up to 5 AS levels, and then narrowed it down to like 3 or 4 as your A2 levels. So I did those 5 to start with, and then culled the chemistry and the business studies to the final year, just doing biology and psychology and sports studies, which really, although 3 separate subjects, was 2 because of the amount of overlap. PE and sports studies, we did sports psychology and anatomy, and biology, we learned about physiology relating to sport and the brain. And so I kind of got lucky in how overlapped they were. It was repeating knowledge, which probably helped me get better grades than if I'd just done 3 separate topics.
Yeah. That makes me I feel so jealous just hearing your story, because I'm obviously I'm a little bit older than you, and the year that I finished school was the year that they started doing physical education as an actual qualification. Like, you couldn't do it as a qualification when I was at school; it didn't exist. To me, PE,
have a knockabout in PE.
Yeah, that was it, right? And I remember being in sixth form, so people outside of the UK, that's age like 16 to 18. We'd be doing PE, but it wasn't even split between all male or all female, because it's such a small class, and we'd do things like ultimate frisbee and softball and things like that, which are good fun. But
gets kids active at the very least.
Yeah, but if I had kind of understood my mission in life as early as you did, I mean, I didn't study biology because I was the best in my year at geography and I enjoyed it. So I thought, why would I do that if I'm, the best in my year at geography? But I did do chemistry and physics. I did physics at A level, but I did maths. Like, why did I do maths? What use was that? Looking back, But yeah, so a little bit of envy there. The fact that you could study those things at school. I would have loved to have had that foresight and that vision when I was your age. But on the other hand, I think everything happens for a reason, and I went off in a different direction, and those things that I did still support what I do now as well. So, it's all kind of swings and roundabouts. So where did you go to uni?
Bristol. So I went to Bristol Uni and studied physiotherapy. It's very much a degree for the job situation. Unless you go study at uni, you can't call yourself a physiotherapist. You can't register as a physiotherapist. I mean, it all went pretty smoothly, to be fair. I can't say I was a grade model student in my first year, but second and third year certainly got more on track for being a physio. But at 19, 20, 21, I think you're not emotionally and mentally, especially for boys, I think more than girls. Obviously, there's a developmental curve that's different for the two genders. But I came out of uni still in a student mentality, not in a professional mentality. And my first year of work helped with that quite a lot. It was a nice transition job between one and the other.
Yeah. So how long were you at Bristol Uni?
So it's 3 years for the degree. Thankfully, didn't have to redo any years. I like good balance to things. I was working as a lifeguard as well at the time, just a bit of part-time work to tide me over and help towards the student loan. I've been very lucky in life. I had parents who said, whatever you save in uni towards paying off a student loan will match at the end of it. Parents teaching you how savings values and all those sorts of things are worthwhile. So I put myself to work. I went out and weekends and some of the evenings, and did a couple of lifeguarding shifts a week. Nothing major, but enough to sort of tally up about half my student loan by the end of 3 years, and was
Wow, that's
comfortable
good.
enough after that to have that paid off, thankfully. I
Mm.
mean, I was, again, just before the current rates of student fees. So the physio degree at the time, you didn't pay tuition fees. It was generally it wasn't mandatory, but it was certainly suggested that you should go into the NHS after you qualify. And I still recommend that for physios now, because the amount of continued learning the NHS can support you with is, I think, far greater than almost every private practice out there, and breadth of knowledge that you'll get is definitely that. So I've lost my train of thought a bit there.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you, A, did you do some time in the NHS, which a lot of physios in the UK do? And I was going to say to you, what was that experience like, and what did you learn? Is what I was going to ask you next anyway.
I learned 90% of 80% of probably what I know today. I think uni feels like it was 10% of the knowledge that I have today. I did 8 years in the NHS all in all. I did a year with adults with learning disabilities down in Dorset. That was my first job out of uni, which, when I qualified, I think the data was saying about 10% of our year got physio jobs in their first year of work, because they'd essentially massively overtrained for the available jobs. And shortly after, I think it was the year before us that had the first challenge, our year and the year after that were the real struggle. Because once the first year had issues, they culled very heavily the numbers of places at most unis in the UK. So I was lucky to get that job. It was somewhere I'd been on placement, and the senior at the time who was running it had just got these 2 new band 5, so newly qualified physios, essentially first 2 years of work, jobs available for funding. And she said, well, look, this is a bit of a niche role. I don't really want to open it up to just anyone. I'd like to offer it only to people who have been here on placement and kind of know what they're getting into and have had some experience of people with learning disabilities. So at a time when a lot of jobs had about 300-400 applicants for them, I managed to interview for a job that had 2 roles for, I think, 14 or 16 applicants. But it helped me become gradually more professional, because the environment in adults with learning disabilities is one where you have to make it fun. There's no other excuse, no other way to really get people potentially who wouldn't necessarily grasp the importance of some of the concepts you're trying to teach and educate. You've got to make it fun instead. And, not to detract from the entire client base, because you do have a very broad mix of intelligence and logic in that client base of adults with learning disabilities. It is a huge spectrum of capability. But as someone coming out still feeling like a uni student and not yet as a serious professional, it helped me kind of settle in these somewhat fun and relaxed spaces of, care homes or daycare centres that a lot of these young adults were going to. And I had a similarly cheery and fun senior in charge of the area, Linda Reeder. She was wonderful, and again understood elements of me, like the hyperactivity and the short attention span, and nurtured that quite well. And then after that I moved up to North Wales and worked for the North West Wales Trust, all around kind of Bangor and Llandudno, and Ysbyty Gwynedd Hospital was the main base, but there was all the way over to Holyhead Hospital. I think there was probably about 8 or 9 satellite hospitals in the region. And I did like my junior rotations. So junior and then senior rotations in physio world is essentially 4 months in one department and then move to another department to get a breadth of knowledge. And then once you've done a kind of circuit of all of that, you move up to 8-month rotations to kind of grow your knowledge further after you've had this baseline and experience. So I worked in a normal kind of musculoskeletal outpatient physio department, the orthopedic wards dealing with hip and knee replacements and broken bones and car accidents and trauma, those sorts of things. I worked in respiratory care. I worked on vascular failure and kind of kidney failure wards, getting people as mobile as they could be. I worked on intensive care, which was a bit of an eye-opener for a young lad when you see people in that much critical condition. we're doing things like suctioning sputum out of their lungs when they're in bed for long periods of time to stop those lungs getting stuck together and filled with risk of infection. So, that the way through to neuro wards and stroke and Parkinson MS and rehab wards, community outreach physios. It was a very, very broad mix of things. And it helps you realize what you want to really work in, because a lot of people think physio, it's sports recovery, sports injuries, but it's such a broad profession. And secondly, I think having that breadth of knowledge even helps me today. So my caseload today is kind of a mix of normal MSK, kind of tendons, ligaments, muscle injuries, sporty people, normal people, right the way through to, older person's care, where we do kind of rehab with them. We run balance classes and all those sorts of things, joint replacements. But majority for me is, as I said, MSK, orthopedic rehab, particularly polytrauma, so big car accidents, bike accidents, those sorts of things, climbers that have had big falls, and neuro rehab. So I kind of head up the team at the moment for stroke, MS, and Parkinson's care for the foreseeable future. But yeah, the NHS breadth of knowledge, I highly, highly, highly recommend to anyone coming out who isn't like already going into uni, sports, fitness. I'm going to work for this team, that team. This is my path, and I already know I'm going to be really linear, because maybe it's slightly less useful then to have the breadth of knowledge. But if you're thinking of just going, I want to be a private practice MSK physio, I actually think the breadth of stuff is useful, because even things like, I know how to spot a good, kidney related back pain rather than a muscular related back pain. And if I'd never worked on that kidney ward, the symptoms of that and the questions around that, I probably wouldn't have had in that much scope.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like, well, what you've described is training in a holistic manner, rather than, if the only tool you've got is a hammer, everything's going to look like a nail, right? But if you've got more tools in your toolbox, not everything's going to look like a nail. And like you said, if musculoskeletal pain is coming from a muscle, or is it coming from the kidney? If you haven't had that training, you're going to think it's the muscle, right? And you're not going to get the job done. You're not going to help the patient.
That's it. Breadth of knowledge and breadth of tools means that you can pick the right one for the job. Sometimes you need a scalpel, sometimes you need a hammer, sometimes you need a fork. It depends if you're eating spaghetti, if you're doing carpentry, or with surgery. You don't want the wrong tool for the wrong job.
Absolutely. Yeah, you'd have trouble eating spaghetti with a scalpel, wouldn't you?
Yeah, or a hammer. That'd be pretty tough. Very messy.
Yeah.
Probably much like doing surgery with a hammer. That would be pretty messy.
Well, I don't know. They do use hammers, don't they, in surgery sometimes?
Thinking of having watched knee replacements. I mean, that's another thing that
and hip
in the
replacements.
NHS, I got the experience and connections working with orthopedic surgeons. And your seniors are going, right, we're going to get you into surgery with them so you can see a knee replacement, so you can see a hip replacement. And I trust you, the empathy that you have for a patient after you watch that operation is completely different to not seeing it in the first place. You're like, yeah, it's going to be tender. It's
Yeah, I can imagine. That's if you don't pass out during watching the surgery. That is.
Yeah,
I know.
I've heard stories.
Yeah, I know. I remember. I went to a cadaver dissection once at St George's Hospital in London, and a friend of mine, I won't say his full name, but everyone called him Big Dave, and he was British kickboxing champion. And he turned green and had to run out of the room, and we were all laughing at him. It was quite funny at the time.
I remember both in that and having watched, I can't remember his name, the guy who did the Bodyworks exhibition.
Yes.
Plasticizing, Dr.
Gunter,
Von, whatever it is.
Gunter something.
Yeah. My brain does a thing where once you're in, it stops being a person and becomes a science experiment, a study. Because watching like that live autopsy he did, the first incision, I'm like, I'm not comfortable with this, But then once he's in and he's, working with organs, I'm like, oh, it's science. It's just like the books and everything else. And I imagine that's a degree of disassociation with it. Yeah, I remember feeling that same way with going to see the cadaver studies. Very interesting. I was lucky enough also to go to a brain dissection at one point, and they were learning about the limbic system, the kind of memory part of the brain.
Mm.
But when it was already just a brain on its own, I'm like, science, didn't have the same human connection to it, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, I suppose once it's no longer connected to the rest of the body, it's not human anymore, is it? In a way, like, because it has no life force, right? What's the difference between a person and a cadaver? Or the person's got life force
really.
Going through it.
Yeah.
You know?
Electricity and the pumping of the heart and the blood and all the rest of it. But that brings about whole different kind of thoughts and discussions around what we are, who we are, current working scientific models of consciousness and self, whether you're religious or not, obviously has a connotation on the soul and all the rest of it.
Yeah, we could do a whole episode just on that. But
good. I love theological and I love philosophical kind of debate and discourse. I find it very interesting.
For sure. So what I'd like you to talk about now is I want you to tell us a little bit about Shawe Physio and why you decided to set that up. 42-year-old Chris came to see me whilst training for his first marathon. Initially, Chris wanted manual therapy on his calf muscles, which were taking a pounding from his long runs. I did recommend to Chris several times that he really needed a full exercise, nutrition and lifestyle program so he could complete the marathon in the quickest time and to minimize his likelihood of injury. However, 6 weeks from his first race, Chris suffered a debilitating back injury that meant he was unable to walk and was devastated that all his hard work had gone down the drain. Chris hobbled into my treatment room the next day to see if we could salvage the situation. I suggested to Chris that he do what I recommended all along, and if he did, he'd probably have a 50% chance of completing the marathon. So I've gave Chris a full physical assessment and then devised a comprehensive exercise, nutrition and lifestyle program. And full credit to Chris, he gave it 100%, totally dedicating himself to the program. Days before the race, Chris came to see me for a final tune-up and to ask whether I thought he was ready for the race. I suggested he start the race, but to stop if he felt any back pain, as there will always be other races. I received a text message from Chris the afternoon of the race to say that he completed it in 3 hours 42 minutes and he had no pain and had little to no muscle soreness. Chris has since gone on to run multiple marathons in impressive times. So if you're suffering from back pain that's preventing you from doing something that you love, why not arrange a consultation with me at www.bodycheck.co.uk so I can show you what's causing the problem and how you can get back to performing at your best. Now, back to the podcast.
Okay, well, Shawe Physio is a clinic based in Hoddesdon. I didn't really think of it as an egotistical project at the time, but still had my name on it. But I think that's has been more about wanting to ensure a level of quality that I would be proud of across the board. I think that's played a part in it, but has a nice ring to it as well, perhaps. When I finished uni at 21, I thought to myself one day, I want to have my own practice. And I kind of very nominally gave myself the goal of at 30, you're going to start a practice. So at 30, I started a practice. No, I was motivated by a little more than that along the way. So having been in the NHS, one of the frustrations I found myself having as I moved into the musculoskeletal department in that region a little more permanently was a little bit of red tape around what you could and couldn't do with patients. We were starting to move quite heavily away from a model of hands-on practice because the evidence base was saying, well, how much benefit do things like massage, mobilizations, and so on and so forth have with people? Bang for your buck with time, with patients. A lot of exercise prescription was showing better long-term results for patients. And so the department basically saying, look, you don't really have time for hands-on treatment. You've got half an hour to initial assess. You've got 20 minutes for a follow-up with patients. And unless you can clinically reason very clearly to your seniors why, you're kind of limited to 4, maybe 6 appointments. And so in some respects, that does make you tighten up your practice to the most evidence-based effective methods possible. But I think it devalues the profession. I think it makes it too narrow. And I think part of it there is expectations from a patient's perspective of I'm coming for physio, I'm going to have some hands-on treatment of some sorts, and not meeting that expectation with patients can be challenging for them. Even if you use it as a gateway. So, someone with back pain, you might be seeing some muscle spasm when you assess them. You might be considering something like some heat treatment, some gentle massage first, some mobilizations of the spine. And that might be short-term relief. That might create a window of opportunity to move. And whilst you're doing it, you can have a conversation with them. You can start educating them about the back and how it works and what this bit is and that bit is and why that might be tight or painful now and models around pain. You can have all these conversations with patients. So I found my hands being tied there. So I thought, do you know what? I wanted to move away from Wales. I wanted to I was a bit fed up with the rain and such. Decided to come back towards, kind of where I grew up and where there was potential opportunities for my wife to develop her business in wedding photography further. And I worked for a private practice, and it was interesting. I learned a lot. I learned a lot of what I didn't want to do in private practice. And it wasn't the worst model of what I've heard or seen about, but it was a private practice that seemed quite conscious of financial benefit. And, I've heard and seen of horror stories. I've seen some places that are very much about upselling, oh, seen you once, you're going to need at least 8 sessions, here, buy a package of 8 sessions. How can you really know that the progress a patient may make from session 1? I argue to anyone who thinks that that's inaccurate. You'll work to those 8 sessions and say, oh yeah, you definitely needed 8, but did you? And some places that were very much about upselling products, or why haven't you seen this patient this many times? And I just thought, I think private practice in all scopes can run the risk, if people are treated that way, of devaluing itself and losing trust. Trust is vital from patients, that they know they can trust in genuine patient-focused care. What I consider ethical private practice. And look, I understand if, let's say you're a sole practitioner and you're working on your own, you filling your books can be the difference to paying your mortgage or not. That's pretty scary to people and a good financial driver. I certainly understand where people are coming from. I mean, I've heard stories of semi-local practitioners, I won't say who or what profession, but booking people in for hour sessions every day, 7 days a week for 4 or 5 weeks in order to fix the problem that they've apparently found in them. And I'm like, okay, that's a lot. I'd like to see your clinical reasoning for that and see you rationale that through. But between those two sides of, I feel the NHS is cutting off components of our therapy that is useful, maybe not the most time efficient way to reach a resolution, but patients still benefit from them, and limiting, like, even if a patient's making good progression, you're moving from A to B, but actually their goals right up here at F for what they need to function for their life. You're like, well, you've had 4 sessions, you made good progress, good luck. Cool. That's really helpful. Thanks. And the private practice where I was seeing these models of being more financially driven, I was like, okay, there's got to be a middle ground, right? There's got to be doing the best by the patient, offering the best options of care, but doing so in a private practice setting where I can control the scope of focus around the patient, that it is patient-driven care. So one model that's pretty common in a lot of private practices is things like revenue splits. 50% of what you make for the clinic you take home, 50% the clinic takes towards its kind of overheads of running costs, the staff that don't generate revenue, like your reception staff, bills, utilities, blah, 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 you name it, right? But that is, again, a subtle bias to each individual clinician on that model. If you have that model, then if that individual clinician's struggling to make ends meet, they're going to really try and suggest, the diary's not all that full, it's going to bias treatment. So again, I was like, okay, we just employ everyone. They take the same amount home every month. And as a private practice, we take the risk that they're not going to be as full as they could be, or busy, or whatever, right? but they don't have to have that effect or bias treatment. We generally focus on, I mean, our tagline is treat the cause, not just the symptoms. You know, we should be making long-term changes in people's lives and making them better long-term, not just, you know, a bit of hands-on work, come back next week, that will manage it. Oh, it's all settled down for a while now, but it'll be back, you know, see me, you know, X, Y, Z. To me, that runs a risk of being, you know, milking. And people always know when that starts to happen. You get that distaste of, I'm not quite sure. Like, education and empowering patients is a big key part of treatment cause, not just the symptoms. We understand that patients are more motivated if they understand the mechanisms at play underneath. And there's some skill to that. I'm sure you need to be able to take nth degree high scientific knowledge and be able to break that down into any level of capability of knowledge. I remember my mum saying, you know, yeah, it's great that you know all this stuff, but do you really know it? And when you'll know it, you'll be able to explain it to your grandmother or a 6-year-old child, or to,
exactly. I know,
that's the art of it.
Absolutely. I know when I'm teaching courses for the Czech Institute, you know, I say to the students, you need to understand this well enough so that when you're coaching your clients how to do specific exercises, you can explain the corrective exercise program, you need to explain it in a way that an 8-year-old would understand it. And if you can't explain it to an 8-year-old, you probably don't fully understand it. And the other thing is, and again, this is something that, you know, I've made this mistake, and this is how you learn. But you get a client and you take them through exercises and you think they understand it because you've taken it through it once, right? It's like you're talking to them, and you might as well be talking Chinese, you know, if you're talking about certain exercises. And, you know, you've got to be really careful with the language that you use, because, you know, obviously you and I can speak in a language that if someone from the street walked in, they might not even realize we're talking English, right?
Yeah, I mean, tell someone to tighten their quadriceps, and probably about 25-30% of the room don't know what their quadriceps are. Yeah. For us, that's like, oh, that's really basic knowledge. But it's like, but for them, it's their thigh muscles.
Yeah, it's really good to hear your philosophy. I really like that idea that, you know, your clinicians in your practice, they're under no pressure to sell. I really like that. And
that in my opinion, that should be a practice manager's job. You know, if your clinicians are doing a great job, you build a great reputation. You build a great reputation, you'll generate business.
Yeah.
People come to you because you get results for their friends and their family. And it's a slower business model to fill a diary. Like, we generally don't run discounts. We run, any new member of staff will run a 50% discount for their first month just to introduce them to people. That's it. Because I think I see a lot of practices in places being like, you know, 25% off, 30% off. Blah. If you went to see a heart surgeon and he had 30% off, you'd probably have questions about that. You'd be like, okay, do I trust in that? Why has he got 30% discount? Like, I think that runs a risk of devaluing the profession in general.
Yeah. Completely.
But agree. No financial drivers. I think reputation and doing a great job is enough to create good business. And you know, at the beginning of things, you do have to invest into some marketing and spread awareness of who you are, where you are, that you exist. I appreciate that. But generally, our marketing, if you look at our social media and those sorts of things, it's generally informative stuff to help people. Try and put our blog posts that are quite well thought through and have good self-help guides in them. I like to try and bring science to as many people as I can in ways that they can understand.
Yeah, I do really love your philosophy, and it's quite interesting. So, as you know, I play tennis, and I've been at a tennis club. I originally joined it in 1982, I think it was, but I had a bit of a gap in between. But I've been
Don't
back
look old enough to have joined it in 1982.
I took a big gap, and I've joined another club. Actually, I was in another club for about, I don't know, 10, 15 years, and I've been back at this club for a long time. And it's quite interesting because there's, I'm not going to mention any names, but there's one particular physiotherapist in the area where my club is, where almost all tennis players go and see this one guy. But they all, oh, this guy is so good, he's so good. And I've heard stories like someone says, "Oh, I've got tennis elbow," and I go and see so and so, and he's amazing. And I'm like, "Oh, okay. Haven't you had tennis elbow for a year?" Well, yeah. And I'm like, okay. And I mean, I'd love to question them as to why they think that he's good and they've still got tennis elbow. But they've been going to him for like 1, 2, 3 sessions a week for a year, and they're still going back, right?
Mm.
So obviously, I'm sure you can guess. They going in there. He's giving them a rub down. They feel a
Feels
bit
a bit
better for
better.
a couple of days,
Mm.
and then they play a couple of games of tennis during the week, and then by the weekend, pain's back. And he's like, how is that? How is that any good, right? And now, as you said, you treat the root cause, not the symptom. Obviously, whoever this person is, who shall remain nameless, he's not looking for the root cause. He's doing the opposite, really, to what you're doing in your practice. He's thinking, if I give this person a rub 2 or 3 times a week, I can make quite good money doing that. And
And
I know
sometimes it's not even as conscious as that. Sometimes it's just easier to manage the symptom. Do a bit of hands-on work, have a lovely
yeah,
chat with the patient, send them on the way. They feel very positive. You've, quite charismatic. You've given them energy, and they come away feeling a bit better. And taking the time to really try and break something down, apply a lot of science to the situation, stay on top of the current research. All of those things take more effort, and I think that's something that most of the general public don't really understand. I think about medical professionals across the board is care takes energy. To give great caring service takes energy, and sometimes you run out. Sometimes you have had bad night's sleep. You've got kids that have been screaming all night. You've seen back to back 10 people in a row, each for a half an hour. You're only 2/3 of the way through your day at this point. You're hitting the 3 p.m. lull after you've had your lunch and maybe too many carbs. But they're human too, and sometimes it's not a conscious effort in anyone's sort of state of play. And behind the scenes, the outward facing mantra is treat the cause, not just the symptom. Do right by the patient is generally a mantra that I give to staff. But one of my mantras for looking after those staff is you can't care for others unless you feel cared for.
Yeah.
If your battery's on 0, if your battery's at 10%, what can you give?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, I know, again, another one of my students at the Czech Institute, he's from Sweden. I think Sweden. Yeah, Sweden. And he's a napropath.
Oh, wow.
And
term I've not heard.
Yeah, napropath. It's like a naturopath, but with a P, napropath. So it's a bit like an osteopath.
Curious.
Yeah. And we kind of have a bit of a running joke because he says, "Oh, my clients come in, I rack them and I crack them and I send them back out again. The next one comes in, I rack them, I crack them and I send them back out again." And unfortunately, there are a lot of people like that, which is a bit sad. I mean, he jokes about it, but that's actually what he does, and he makes really good money doing it. But the other thing as well, what you were saying, if someone's tired or whatever, and they might just, it's not a conscious thing to, oh, this is the best way to make money or whatever. But it might also be that that's what they're comfortable doing. It might be that they're very good hands-on, but they're not so good at perhaps designing, a corrective exercise program or giving them lifestyle advice. It might just be that's where they feel comfortable.
Yeah, their knowledge base might not be in the deeper mechanics of tennis elbow.
Yeah.
They can manage the symptoms, they can make someone feel better, the person feels they've had good value for their investment, then, that's what they've had. For me, there's that duty of care of we need to be able to help people long term.
I think...
And it's harder. You need time to mull on those things. You get a challenging patient, you don't solve it like this. You need time to create a multi-stage program of progressive exercise and change. All of that takes time. All of that takes energy.
Yeah. It also reminds me of someone who actually, he used to be my doubles partner, and he had back pain, and he said, "Oh, I'd really like to come and see you." And I was like, "Yeah, okay, not a problem." And he went to his mum, and he said, "Oh, mum," I knew his mum as well. He said, "Oh, I really want to go and see Lee for my back pain." And she said, "Well, no, we've got insurance, so I'm going to send you for a physio." And he came back to me, and he kind of felt quite bad. He said, "Oh, mum says I've got to do it." He was a teenager at the time. He said, "Oh, my mum says I need to go and see a physio using insurance." And I said, "Yeah, it's not a problem. Hopefully, you'll get it sorted out, and you'll be back on the tennis court very soon." And then every time I saw him, I was like, "How's your back?" "Yeah, it's not good. It's not good. It's not good." Anyway, he did get physio for a year, and it didn't get any better at all. There was no improvement at any point. And he did come and work with me, and then before I knew it, he was off playing tennis in Australia somewhere. And my guess is that, unlike your philosophy, unlike my philosophy, whoever was treating him wasn't looking for the root cause. That's my guess. Or again, as we've just been discussing, perhaps the skill set that they needed, they didn't have, perhaps.
Yeah.
But I've got so many stories like that.
Yeah, I mean, there's the kind of 2 points that I'd like to make from that, I suppose, which is each professional has their own knowledge base, their own interest that they've focused on. They won't know everything. Talk to a cardiac surgeon about neurosurgery, they probably aren't going to answer the questions in a lot of detail. They might know the cliff notes. That could be helpful, but maybe not. But the second point being, I've had over the years a number of people ask me, literally patients in a reception coming and asking about this problem, that problem, can you help? They said, "Oh, which one's better? Chiro, osteo, physio?" And why it's only those three that ever come up, but that's what it is. And I say the same thing that would include everyone from sports therapists to naturopaths to whatever, you name it, right? People who don't have any of those degrees, titles, and have just increased their knowledge over the years. I think all of these are just structures of learning. And in any one profession, physios included, despite my bias, you will have good and bad professionals. Every person is different. Every clinician is different. So I've seen, osteopaths and chiropractors who haven't had training as heavily in things like rehabilitative exercise go on to become masters of that because they see the evidence base. They go, "Hey, this has got some really good merit for this and that problem. I should probably pick up my skills in that area." It's tools, as we talked about earlier, having the tools, following the evidence base. I can manipulate people. Occasionally I will use those osteopathic chiropractic manipulation techniques of clicking bones. It's a tool in my toolbox. I think it has a place, it has a use. But yeah, I like the mantra of there is no one better profession, just better professionals.
Yeah. That brings up something else that, again, I've experienced as a teacher. So I get people coming on my courses. They might be a massage therapist, they might be a personal trainer, they might be osteopath, they might be chiropractor, they might be physiotherapist, they might be medical doctor. And I've had all those on my courses. And what's really interesting is all of the physiotherapists, chiropractors, osteopaths have really strong anatomy knowledge, which is absolutely key to what we teach. The personal trainers come along with not great ability to design programs, but they pick it up very quickly because they're used to writing programs, right? That you kind of have to turn almost what they've learned upside down, then they get it almost. But then I find that the physiotherapists, chiropractors, and osteopaths, they struggle more to pick up the exercise program design side of things.
Unless it's 3 rounds of 10. Which is, of course, the running joke. Every exercise a physio gives you is 3 by 10.
Yeah.
Understand strength and conditioning principles, maybe.
Yeah. That is a bit of a running joke. But what I've found is that some of the physios, chiropractors, and osteopaths I've taught at the Czech Institute go on to be phenomenal at their jobs. Like the background knowledge that they have just allows them to, really really become amazing practitioners. And it really, what's the right word? It really pleases me to see someone that I've helped get to that level as well, because I know that they're obviously out there helping lots of other people, which, is why we're both in this game, right?
Yeah.
So moving on, sorry, go on.
I was going to say, before you move on from that, I mean, it highlights something really interesting, because people's expectations of what a physio learns in uni is kind of interesting. So if you ask most people, you'd probably expect a physio to know quite a lot about massage and quite a lot about exercise prescription. But if you actually go and look at certainly when I was at uni, maybe this has changed since then, but if you looked at the actual curriculum, you'd be shocked at the size of the teaching around those topics. The knowledge that I picked up in strength and conditioning since qualifying, because of my interest in things like CrossFit and staying fit and active myself, I'm understanding much more around principles of explosive power generation, around development of muscle mass for strength-based activities versus endurance-based activity, and tailoring the prescription of exercise we give to people to their specific situation. Because if you've got a front row forward coming in versus a gymnast, how you prescribe your exercise should vary dramatically for the same issue. Patella tendon, for instance. Your front row forward has got a lot of strength-related pushing motion, not a lot of elastic, explosive power in the front row forwards. And then your gymnast is all about rebounding. One needs to develop more plyometric capability, and one needs more pure concentric strength. And you need to treat those two issues that on paper look the same. It's patella tendinopathy or itis, or whichever ending you wish to choose for that, algia. But the reason for them developing it and the sport they have to get back to are very different, and you need to tailor your exercise approach to that.
Yeah, that also reminds me of something, again, that's really important, I think, for most people to understand. And I think particularly in the field of sport, they're getting better at this, and it's what we call end stage rehab. So, if someone's playing sport, as an example, and they get an injury, what used to happen is they'd go to the physio would get them out of pain, and they'd say, right, you can go back to the strength and conditioning coach now. And then strength and conditioning coach is, getting them doing weightlifting and powerful training and all that kind of stuff. But actually, there's a whole bridge between those. Yeah, right? And you've got to go through all the stages of, base conditioning, and then building strength, functional strength, maximal strength, and then power. It's not until you're ready to compete at your sport without breaking down again that the rehab is actually completed. A lot of people think it's when they're out of pain. It's not when they're out of pain. It's when they're strong enough or stable enough or flexible enough to go back to that event and not reoccur the same injury.
Absolutely. And take into account then, like, the difference even within one profession. I've got a physio in an MSK department in the NHS who's dealing with, use a football player with an Achilles tendonitis or a calf strain. They're limited to a set number of sessions, maybe 6-ish sessions, and they're going to give them exercise prescription. They'll get them to that certain point, and there might be a big gap between that and what they do on the football pitch in that time frame and that allowance. The same profession, take a physio who looks after Arsenal football team and has an hour each day with each, or 2 different separate hours, maybe 3 with each individual player that's injured. And the level of rehab and the where they reach them to is going to be completely different. It's specialist knowledge, and it's time with patients. And that time with patients is a huge factor.
Yeah. One of the things that you mentioned as well, when you look at, what people perceive physiotherapists learn at university, what's quite interesting I actually did a postgraduate diploma in sports massage therapy. And I was the only one that wasn't a physiotherapist in the class. And it was really interesting being almost like a fly on the wall because, at the break times, I think I was the only male as well, if I remember right. I think I was the only male as well. In the break times that they were all relatively newly qualified. And they were just amazed. They were kind of saying, wow, what we're learning on this massage therapy course is almost better than our entire
Absolutely.
physiotherapy training in terms of their hands-on skills,
Yeah, I think we had 3 1-hour seminars in 3 years on massage.
Wow. Yeah.
We practiced on each other outside of those classes. People be like, is that it? Okay. Do you want to practice? We had a little group that would just meet up on a Saturday and just exchange massages. Just practice.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the risk of being a very broad profession, though, right? As a broad profession that covers everything from MSK to neuro to respiratory care, you can be spread quite thin in a 3-year course. Versus if you studied acupuncture at uni, for instance, that's a 3-year course. And some of that overlaps, right? There's anatomy and physiology and so on. But if you look at the kind of postgraduate courses for physios to learn acupuncture, very different amount of time involvement.
Yeah.
And you come out with a different level of skill at the point you finish that course. It's what you then do after. You've got the knowledge and the capability to be safe, to know what you're doing as the required amount. But in all of those fields, that specialist knowledge, you need to keep putting the work in. Like any physio who finishes uni, does a couple of years in the NHS, thinks they know it all, or any profession who falls into that trap of, I'm an expert in this. Don't worry, I've got this. You should always be doubting yourself. You should always be continuing your research. I mean, CPD, continuing professional development, exists for a reason, because you need to keep the tools sharp. And you will lose it if you don't keep refreshing that knowledge.
Yeah. Yeah, that's music to my ears. So moving on, what do you feel are the keys to a healthy body? And also, how does physiotherapy help with that? Hey Rebels, I'm briefly interrupting this episode to share some really exciting news with you. As of this month, July, I will be releasing an extra No Punches Pulled episode every month with an amazing and almost certainly controversial guest who's not scared to put their head above the parapet. These guests will be exposing lies and corruption, sharing their stories of being gaslit or cancelled for telling the truth, and offering real-world solutions to achieving optimal health and maintaining freedom amidst increasing censorship and restrictive regulations. These are the types of episodes I started producing back in 2022, for which I was cancelled on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and deplatformed from LinkedIn. These additional episodes will be for subscribers only. For the equivalent of 1 takeaway coffee per month, you can become a paid subscriber and receive exclusive access to content the authorities don't want you to hear. I really hope you can support the podcast to help it continue and also help me to bring you even better, more controversial, educational, and inspiring guests. Subscribing to the Radical Health Rebel podcast is a much more productive investment than supporting organizations that feed you lies, propaganda, and predictive programming like TV licensing, cable, satellite, and major film streaming services. Subscribing to the Radical Health Rebel podcast to receive premium content couldn't be simpler. Just go to the show notes, click on support the show, and follow the instructions. In fact, why not do it right now? And once you've subscribed, come straight back and listen to the rest of this episode. So for the equivalent of just 1 takeaway coffee per month, let's rebel against the mainstream narrative and create a healthier, fairer, and freer world together. Thanks for listening, and thanks for your support.
So I suppose this comes, I've been doing a lot of further reading and further knowledge, because I think most professionals are still quite narrow in their scope. physios with even the breadth of knowledge that we get taught in uni and NHS, we're still thinking about muscles, tendons, bones. And a healthy body is far more than that. We might even include respiratory capability and cardiovascular system. Body's more than that. I see a future more and more so with higher, more experienced clinicians, because I think you need that bed of knowledge in your specialism first. But I've certainly found myself looking at the broader scopes of what is health, what is, that health span, for want of a better word, going to be like for a person. And this draws on some of the kind of healthcare 3.0 model talked about by Peter Attia in his book Outlive, and similar professionals in the field starting to include much more breadth of what is health. We know about nutrition, but how many physios talk about how, the nutritional choices of their patient could be leading to some of their knee pain? If you're morbidly obese and you've got knee issues, I don't want to just write it all off to the fact that you are putting a lot of force through your knee joint, but to think that it has no effect on that situation is dumb. Physics are physics and force is force. I've seen patients go through major weight loss journeys and improve their physical activity levels at the same time, and then they're like, oh, my knee and back pain's gone. You're like, yeah, well, force. So I think, a healthy body is more than physical activity, staying fit and active. From reflections people have made on the amount of media coverage of stay fit, be active, do sport. Yeah, that's funded by Coca-Cola and that's funded by major food corporations, because they don't want you to think, well, maybe I shouldn't be eating and drinking all that liquid sugar, but staying fit and active, that's the way to be healthy. I'm like, it's a part of the puzzle, but this chunk here is kind of important too. And then on top of those two, physical activity, nutrition, because food is medicine, not going to lie. That's, the building blocks for everything we need for our body, and conscious choices around food will affect your body and how you feel. Who'd have thought? But then you've also got sleep. Most people know, I should get 7 to 8 hours a night. But I can come back and touch on this in a minute. There are far more factors on sleep that are super important. And mental fitness, and using the term fitness specifically, like physical fitness, it's an ongoing task. When you think, mental health, I'm healthy now, you think you've reached a finish point. You don't need to think about it anymore. Well, that's like saying I need to train for 6 months and I'm good. I need to make good nutritious choices for 6 months and I'm good. It's not how it works. It's an ongoing thing. So mental fitness is, I think, a far more fitting term. That certainly I'm not the first to call it that, but I think it's a very good approach to sustaining good stress management, handling grief and trauma, relationships and communication skills, and so on and so forth. The list goes on in the column of psychology. But those main 4 pillars are essentially what we should start to think about more as medical professionals, even when we're dealing mostly with the physical body and activity and movement. Because if someone's chronically sleep deprived, then their problems to do with tendon health may actually be maybe due to lack of healing time, lack of sleep and recovery. They don't manage to get to they don't have a good routine around physical activity, or their eating habits are great until the stress hits them and then they just comfort eat. Dealing with this pillar comes into how you're eating, and then how that affects your body weight, how that body weight affects how you're moving or your performance in elite sport. Those 4 columns should all be considered, and we don't have one professional to manage all of them. And so I don't think they get interlinked very well. Something I'd like to do more of with people is start talking about that approach to the 4 major pillars of health. There's a 5th column, which is essentially supplements and medication. But even Peter Attia, who himself was a pancreatic cancer surgeon for many years, he's like, this is actually kind of, do these 4 right, and you shouldn't need the 5th column very much. Unless specific medical conditions like absorption issues for certain nutrients and so on and so. So physio plays a major role here. I think it has an easy carryover to talking about nutrition and talking about people's BMI and body weight and habits. But I think adding in sleep and I suppose I'd probably be remiss to say that almost every medical professional I've ever spoke to find themselves sometimes playing pseudo counselor to their patients. And if that's the case, maybe we need to improve our skills in that column and actually do some additional qualification or learning at the very least around those topics. Because, God, the amount of times, if you know anything about the mechanisms of pain, you know that if someone's in a high stress, grief scenario or generally feeling depressed and struggling, then it amplifies pain. Your threshold to where you then develop a sensation of pain drops. But you're riding high and everything's going great in your life otherwise. The same stimuli, trauma is like, it's a bit of an owie, it's fine. And others, it's crippling, it's painful, it's horrific. So we need to understand those things better.
Yeah, it's interesting. The 4 pillars that you mentioned, in the check system, we have what we call 6 foundation principles, which they're kind of covered in those 4 to a degree. So, and they're in a hierarchy as well. So number 1 are your thoughts, most important thing, thoughts. Second is breathing, which you cover in quite a lot of detail, I know, in physiotherapy. Hydration, nutrition, movement, sleep. And the basis of that is that unless you have those 6 foundations in place, forget doing anything else. Forget trying to biohack or anything else. Imagine if you use the analogy of the human body being like a building, and if you're an athlete, it's like a building in an earthquake zone. If you don't have strong foundations in an earthquake zone, the building is going to fall down, right? So you've got to have those 6 foundations in place if you want to achieve optimal health. They're non-negotiable. It's like you can't have those nailed if you want optimal health.
And you, like me, have seen a lot of wobbly houses over the years.
Absolutely.
Their foundations be like this. Leaning therapies are going on.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say what I find quite painful to watch is people running at the end of a marathon. I don't know if you've ever seen that. It's hard to watch.
Or one of the high-end athletes, even them, they get wobbly.
Oh, do they? Yeah, I've only seen. So I've been to the London Marathon once, and I think all the fast guys had gone by the time we got there. And just watching people run, I mean, obviously most people overpronate and they've got a Trendelenburg sign.
Yeah, but they're avoiding the blister that they've got now. And altered mechanics. Good old adaptive human body. It's going to keep you running, but there's a cost.
Yeah, it's interesting. It actually reminds me as well of, you were saying earlier that sometimes if someone comes in and, you do some manual therapy on them, you make them feel better. It's like a gateway into, moving them on to finding the cause. And I'll just tell you a quick story. And again, I won't mention any names, but the guy I'm going to talk about is probably going to listen to this. So a guy who came to see me, he had just started marathon running or training for marathon. And he had an American coach, so he was being coached online. And this guy kept getting calf strains. And he was in his 40s, only took up exercise for the first time in his adult life in his 40s, and it happened to be marathon running. And he kept getting calf strains. And this coach said to him, look, what you need to do, you need to find someone in the UK that does active release techniques to work on your calves. So that's how he found me. And he came in and I would treat him and he would feel a whole lot better. And then he would go and run and then he'll come back and see me next week, right? So right from the beginning, I said to him, look, what you need to do is you really need to come and get a full program from me because you're not strong enough to do a marathon without getting injured. I said, you probably need some advice on nutrition and other lifestyle factors. And then when I went through what I offer, he just said, oh, you're too expensive. Okay. And he kept coming back every week and I was making him feel better and he was able to run, right? And now I can't remember, it's some time ago. I can't remember if I think it was his first marathon ever he was building up to. I could be wrong, but I think it was his first, and it was in Berlin. And he was on holiday in France with his family. And I'm guessing it was the south of France because he said he was running on a lot of hills, which is quite hilly in the south of France. And it got to a point where his back just completely seized up and he literally couldn't even walk, right? And so he rang me from France. And this was, I think, 6 weeks out from the Berlin Marathon. And he said,
please, I need a miracle.
Yeah, right.
Had a few of them over the years.
So he came in the next day, which was so he flew back, came in to see me the next day. And at the time where I was working, my treatment room was on the 4th floor. So he had to hobble up these stairs. And he got up and he said, do you think I'm going to be able to run a marathon? Now, in my head, I'm thinking, you've got no chance. Like, you can barely walk. How on earth are you going to run a marathon in 6 weeks' time? So I looked at him and I thought, if I say no, that's going to be it, right? You know, the nocebo effect, right? So I said, look, you remember what I said to you right at the beginning? That you need to do the full program, right? And he was like, yeah, I do remember. And I was like, this is what you need to do. And he was like, okay, tell me more. And I said, look, if you do the full program, get an exercise program, nutrition plan, I said, I'll give you a 50% chance of doing the marathon, right? I was lying, right? Now, it wasn't me being unprofessional. It was me being realistic, but also trying to give him some hope, right? Because you never know in 6 weeks.
Although the right path to a long-term resolution, right?
Yeah. You know, and I was kind of thinking, you know, maybe he might miss this marathon, but maybe the next one he'll be all right. So anyway, so we started on the program pretty soon after that, and he stuck to it 100%. And he was still coming in for treatment every week because obviously, you know, he's coming towards the end of marathon training. He was pretty beat up. And every week he's coming in, I'm like, I'm feeling better. And then I can't remember how much running he did in that 6 weeks, but he got back to running, but he had a lot of miles in his legs anyway, right? So I wasn't massively concerned. So he came in on I think it was a Thursday, and he was flying out on a Friday. And he was like, we're going to make a decision when I come in today. You see what I'm like, and we'll make a decision. And he'd lost a ton of weight as well. And it was mainly the nutrition change, right? He'd lost quite a lot of weight. And even then I was still like, I don't think he's going to be able to do this. But I don't want to say no, right? I don't want to, because again, I've seen miracles happen so many times. So I said to him, look, what I think you should do, and it's entirely up to you, but this is what I think you should do. Go to Berlin, get on the start line, and if it starts to really hurt, don't be a hero. There's going to be other marathons.
Great advice.
So he said, okay. So obviously he's flown out the next day. Sunday afternoon, about 2:00, I'm thinking, I wonder how he's got on in his marathon. As I thought that, my phone's gone ping. So I've gone running to my phone, and it was from this guy. I won't mention his name. And it says, I've just finished the marathon. I think he did it in 3 hours 30, which for a first time, I'm pretty sure it was his first time.
Pretty solid.
For the first time is pretty good, right? Especially for a 40-something-year-old who hadn't done exercise for 25 years. And he said, not only have I got no pain, he said, I haven't even got any muscle soreness. Right? And 6 weeks before that, I would have said this guy had no chance. But I think when you put everything together in a holistic plan, and particularly he was very motivated, right? He was very, very motivated. So he stuck to the plan, really stuck to the plan. And, you know, and he's gone on to run multiple marathons he's for his age, he's very, very quick. He's gone to run some amazing times. He's done a few triathlons, although I think he's given that up because he likes his marathon running. But it just shows you what happens when you do treat the cause and not just the symptoms, you know.
And there's tons to unpack in there. Like, so you saying we're not going to say no. Like most people will know in my clinic, the words "I can't" are banned. It's just a hard ban. And you get one warning. Now, if a patient comes in, we're doing treatment, and you say, do this, and they say, I can't. I said, right, I'm going to tell you now, those words are banned. We don't say them in here because you just create a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
If you think you can't do it, you won't do it. The only thing that's stopping you is you. And so often that's true. So instead of I can't, I say, right, okay, whenever that is the feeling that you have, tell me, I'll try. That's a much better statement to make. I'll try. That thing that seems impossible, just say you'll try. Give it a go. Or tell me that'll be tough. Okay, fine. Let's give it a go. I'll support you as I feel I need to. So mental state, as you discussed there, can be a huge blocker to capability. If you believe you can't do it, you can't do it. You just put your own blocker in. So getting those words out of clients' and patients' lexicon is definitely worthwhile. The other thing that I love to unpack on that is your involvement with nutrition. Because in the case of runners, I think, the Achilles tendon takes about 8 times body weight load on impact when you're running. So every 1 kilo you lose of body weight is 8 kilos off your Achilles of force when you're running.
Per step.
Yeah. And now add that up across a marathon. That's a lot less physical energy to absorb in your tissues.
Thousands of kilos.
Absolutely, right? Even looking at, I don't know, power sport athletes, people who are doing Olympic lifting, right? If you weigh 100 kilos, you will see people lifting, big guy, you can lift a lot of weight, you can squat a lot of weight. Yeah, sure. But have you seen that lass over there who weighs 55 kilos cleaning 110? What's she got that you don't? She's got mobility. She's got good stability and balance and control. Great technique. And all of those with slightly less body weight to also squat at the same time. It's not all about mass and strength. Your runner that you are working with there, you look probably at technique with his running. You probably looked at that total body weight involved. You looked at capability in specific parts of their body. And all of those forces are not just, additive to how much force your body is able to take, but they're almost multiplicative to that. It has a much bigger impact when you add them all together.
Yeah, for sure. So moving on, can you explain what extended scope physiotherapy is, or ESP, and what role does ESP have with the types of conditions that we've been discussing today? I first met Amelia at a health club where I was hosting an event offering back screenings to the members. The first thing I noticed about Amelia was a dullness in her eyes, which I later realised was due to extreme pain, and I noticed that she was unable to turn her head and had to turn her whole body if she wanted to look in a different direction. Amelia informed me that she had a history of repeated shoulder and neck pain for the last 2 years and was diagnosed with spinal stenosis at C4-5, C5-6 and C6-7, and a stenosis is a blockage which in Amelia's case was in the spinal canal of her neck, irritating her spinal cord. She had extreme tenderness over her neck and trapezius muscles on both sides, and she suffered from severe neck pain continuously. Amelia informed me that she'd been advised that spinal surgery was the only option, but the surgery came with great risks, including potential paralysis, and no guarantee of success, which made Amelia fearful of the surgery. In addition to this, Amelia suffered from continuous exhaustion, painful intestinal gas and bloating, even though she felt she was following a healthy diet. After a thorough evaluation, I designed Amelia a corrective exercise, nutrition, and lifestyle plan, plus I referred her to a Nuka chiropractor for specific adjustments to her neck. After following the plan religiously, Amelia is much stronger and much more flexible than she's ever been before, and no longer suffers from repeated neck pain and has full range of motion in her neck. Amelia also reported that her energy was maximized and that she no longer suffers from the gripping stomach pains that had dominated her life for a very long time. If you're suffering like Amelia was and you'd like to find out more about getting to the root cause of your pain, go to www.bodycheck.co.uk. That's bodychek.co.uk to request your consultation.
So generally, extended scope practitioners, as they're thought of today, are specialists in one area. So they tend to develop further knowledge than you do on the course, to the point where they can pick up additional skills like ultrasound scanning and actually be able to give a diagnosis based on an ultrasound scan. Or you might have someone who is able to become a prescriber for things like steroidal injections or certain medications. It's quite a narrow band that certain extended scope practitioner physios can build into. So, for instance, we've got an extended scope practitioner who worked as a chronic pain specialist in the NHS. Now, most physios understand what chronic pain is, but they don't have that specialist knowledge of working with them. And I think, like I've been talking about with the sleep, with the nutrition, with mental health, I think mental fitness, we'll see more extended scope in physio specifically, picking up elements of that as well, rather than just being like one brand of physio that you're specializing in. You know, I think we'll start to see those pillars of long-term good health being considered an extended scope of not just physios, but many other medical health professionals. And I think it will be nice to see some postgraduate tailored courses specifically for, in the physio example, nutrition for physiotherapists. You understand some degrees of the physiology, but let's talk about, gut health, gut anatomy, the gut biome, the effect that carbohydrates have on insulin levels and how that affects, development of fat tissue and metabolic conditions. I'd like to see more of that in the profession and across the board of all health professionals. Even medical doctors could do with understanding more about physical exercise, activity, and strength and conditioning. But I've always liked also the analogy of the overflowing bathtub. And your bathtub can only ever hold so much water of knowledge. If you keep putting water of knowledge in, some of it's going to overflow. And you need to keep scooping that water back up and putting it back in and trying to stay on top of things. And, brains can only hold so much knowledge in their, relevant and fresh memory.
Yeah. What about issues like arthritis?
I suppose this relates most to sometimes you can't treat the cause as a physio. I can't change the state of the bones in your joint. I can improve the stability around that joint and your control of movement around it, and maybe your balance that might be having rotational or lateral forces on your knee. But I can't magically make your bones better. So occasionally, managing symptoms is actually appropriate. But it shouldn't be that's everyone's case. You should ideally strive to treat the cause, not just the symptoms, until there's a situation where actually symptom management is appropriate here. And when that happens, the component that needs to be there is the education. You need the patient to understand this is a condition that is not going to go away with physio. You're potentially going to have flare-ups of symptoms from time to time. And here you have an informed choice of options that we can support you with to manage those symptoms. But that informed choice is the key, not, come back next week, come back next week, come back next week. It's like, okay, well, here's the underlying mechanism. Here's what we can do about it. We're going to work to try and make some long-term improvements. But beyond that, you might need some management of your symptoms that might come from medication, might come from eating choices, might come from hands-on treatment, whatever you find works for you. But here are a bunch of options that you can try.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned nutrition. I'm going to share a story that I've shared many times on this podcast. So apologies to those that have heard this story before. But about almost 5 years ago, I decided to change what I was eating for breakfast, and I started including porridge oats. Have I told you this story before?
No, but I'm kind of guessing where it's going, but we'll see.
Yeah. So I started having these porridge oats for breakfast. I was having them with a protein shake as well. And around the same time, I started getting pain in my knee, in my left knee, which I always call my good knee, because I had a slight ACL tear in the right knee. And I was kind of thinking, it feels, on palpation, it feels like, it could be a medial collateral ligament, it could be medial meniscus. And so I was kind of doing stuff in the gym to kind of help with that. And this went on for a while, and I could get about 90-degree of flexion in my knee. So, normal was about 135 degrees. So I was very short in range of motion. And when I was in the gym, it wasn't causing any problem at all. I could squat and lunge, and wasn't causing any problem. But when I was playing tennis, it was a problem. And then for about 5 days after playing tennis, it was sore, and bending down was difficult and things like that. And this went on for 3 years. And I kept thinking it was medial collateral or medial meniscus. And then I just happened to be working with a colleague of mine who's an osteopath. And he ran some diagnostics on my knee, and he's like, no, it's not your meniscus. No, it's not your MCL. He said, it's osteoarthritis. And I was like, oh, okay, interesting.
And your brain goes, that's the death now. No, not osteoarthritis in the knee.
So, it wasn't straight away. It was some months afterwards, and it wasn't. Has porridge oats got any causal relationship to the arthritis in the knee? But for a different reason, I just stopped eating the porridge, and within 3 weeks, all the pain was gone, and I had complete range of motion in that knee. And it just goes to show you that sometimes it can be something as simple as that, and it can be nutritional, and it might not be biomechanical at all, right? So I just thought it was quite interesting that you did actually mention nutrition, because certainly I've seen it play a role directly with arthritis. And also, something else that you mentioned, the gut microbiome. If there's any inflammation in the gut, that can inhibit particularly type 1 muscle fibers in the abdominal wall, which stabilize the spine and the pelvis and the rib cage. So, people can get injuries, and it can be directly related back to what they're eating if it's causing inflammation in the gut, as an example. So they're all really,
a massive nutrition tangent, but
yeah,
just as like a one power of nutrition and the importance of food example is actually it's two. One, I've always loved the breakfast is the most important meal of the day. Yeah, that was purely Kellogg's branding. That's not a fact. And then you add on top of that what most people have for breakfast. It's refined carbohydrate.
Yeah.
It's going to spike your insulin first thing in the morning when you get up, and that's going to crash. That's going to give you a craving, and you're going to likely eat more carbs throughout the day. And insulin, the fun you can have with diabetes. I always love our body is trying to regulate in a 5-liter average amount of blood volume in most humans. You think of that 5-liter jug of water that you can get from a supermarket with a little handle on the top. In that, your body's trying to regulate 1 teaspoon of sugar. Like your liver's doing a pretty hard job to manage that. If you're circulating 1.5 teaspoons of sugar in your blood, you've got diabetes type 2. That's basically the difference. It's half a teaspoon of sugar regulation. And insulin is essentially your body's hormone to say, get this sugar out of the blood and stick it somewhere else.
Yeah.
It can stick it in muscle. It can stick it, if it's full in muscle and liver, it can turn it into fat and store it. But the one I was going to say in relation to the gut microbiome is dairy. A bunch of my reading around dairy, what is it? Worldwide, it's something like 65, 75, 70% of people are lactose intolerant by the age of 21. They can no longer break down lactose. They no longer produce the lactase enzyme. In European countries, it's closer to 50% just because we had dairy in our diet for a longer time. But let's say 50% of people in Europe are lactose intolerant to some degree by 21. Well, if you can't break it down, lactose goes all the way through your system, your stomach, your intestine, to the large intestine, unbroken down. Lactose is essentially what I think is a glucose and a fructose molecule. But in your lovely gut biome, there are bacteria. They're symbiotic with us. They're supposed to be there to a degree. Keep feeding them lactose. And the particular gut bacteria that do produce lactase and can break down lactose for their fuel, they're going to multiply. And when they break it down, they make a byproduct, which is methane. So you're going to feel bloated and you feel gassy and all the rest of it. But the fun bit comes with the links that they've been finding about the communication. You might have heard that the gut biome is essentially our second brain. It communicates through the wall of the intestine and gives off signals and markers that affect our body as a whole. And one of the things that it seems to do is, if you get a surplus of these bacteria that survive and thrive on digesting lactose, is they can make you crave dairy. Wow. You can't use it, but they can. Yeah. That to me is like, okay, maybe we need to start thinking about this gut biome malarkey. And it's only really recently come to the forefront, I'd probably say, 5 to 10 years in more medical professionals' knowledge of the gut biome, and public at large. It's probably a very small percentage of the world's population that even know what a gut biome is. And it'll be very interesting to see where that research, goes. Fermented foods, prebiotics, feed the good gut bacteria, try and avoid all the stuff that feeds overdevelopment, and even things like fasting. So I personally do 2 7-day fasts a year. I do first week of January, first week of July, where I just have water or black coffee essentially for a week. There's loads of benefits to that sort of extended period of fasting, and it isn't for everyone. If you're already pretty lean body mass, you do need to be careful around that. And there are certain conditions to do with nervous system regulation, and you should always consult with a medical professional about whether you should be able to do that or not. Blood testing is helpful for that. But as part of that process of fasting, your gut biome gets to reset. Your insulin sensitivity gets a solid degree of reset. Your blood pressure management gets a solid degree of reset. There's this wonderful process called autophagy, or autophagy, depending on how you want to pronounce it. My understanding of which is essentially, and it was first really discovered and documented in as late as 2015. It was studies that were looking at why do cultures that have fasting in them have lower rates of cancer. And after about 48 hours of not eating, this process called autophagy happens. Your body's immune system goes and hunts down the oldest, most knackered, least useful cells in our body. The ones who've got some degree of DNA mutation going on in them. That's not great. Let's get that out here. Guess what they tend to become? Cancer cells. It also helps break down, the oldest, least useful cells in the body, scar tissue, stuff like that to a degree. But unless you're in a period of fasting, you do not get this autophagy effect occurring. There's some great research from Jason Fung around this sort of topics of fasting. He's a big researcher in the area. And, as someone who has cancer in one side of their family, I'm like, I think I should build this into my habits. And it's a topic that I think, again, is only really coming to the forefront now. And unlike breakfast is the most important meal of the day, fasting doesn't make anyone money. So it doesn't get a lot of marketing funds. And as such, not many people understand how the benefits of that can occur. Even periodic fasting, which obviously from an insulin sensitivity point of view is very helpful. But this autophagy process made me think, right, I want to do a couple of at least 3 days fasts to get 24-hour window of this autophagy happening in my body. And after I did a few of those, I extended that to these kind of 7 days, twice a week, which I then tend to roll into a kind of 1 meal a day diet process that's relatively keto leaning after that.
Yeah. Yeah, we could make a massive dive into the subjects of the gut microbiome. Again, I've done many episodes on it. Oh, one more question for you. What would be the first steps you advise people to do if they want to be healthier and move better?
I think those 4 pillars we talked about earlier, the cliff notes on them to make some pretty good long-term changes to your health, they're actually really bloody simple. A lot of the government guidance that people are being given can be very simplified, very generic, but it's still helpful. I'd love to be able to get one-to-one time with people to really find out where their specific issues in and drill down on each of those. But generally, the guidelines of be active, 4 or 5 days a week, try and do 30 minutes of exercise to get to a point of challenged breathing where you would struggle to get a long conversation in and have to take a pause between sentences to catch your breath. Pretty simple guidance. 10,000 steps a day is another simple bit of guidance. It just works to staying active. Now, obviously, if you can build from that point, great, cool. Add in hobbies that you enjoy, that are easy for you to keep doing. Habits are best formed when you enjoy doing them, rather than I've got to put myself through, a CrossFit workout every week that isn't for everyone. Well, CrossFit definitely can scale to everyone's capabilities, but some people see that scenario and they're put off by it, and they're like, I'd rather play tennis. Okay, cool, go play tennis. Great. Nutrition. I do actually really like the CrossFit mantra for going from sickness to wellness, not necessarily from wellness to fitness, where you need to be a bit more specific, but certainly the first half of this scale of, their mantra is eat meat, veg, nuts and seeds, some fruit, little starch, no sugars. It doesn't talk about, grains, legumes, and dairy in there, because it starts by taking a very whole foods approach, a good mix of protein sources and lower on the especially refined carbohydrates that are going to affect insulin. And some people do have irritation by grains and dairy and legumes. So starting without them, getting settled, and then after maybe a month, 6 weeks of being on that, pick one of the 3 and introduce it to your diet and see how your body reacts. So, that mantra is great. I think it is always worth individuals doing a period of time where they try as accurately as they can to track what they eat, including weighing their food. Because I think more than it being you need to sit on this diet and forever track it, just building awareness of, oh, this has this many calories, and it's made of carbohydrates mostly, or proteins mostly, or fats mostly, a little bit of knowledge of what they do to your body, but just tracking and simply looking at calories. Now, I'm not big on calorie counting is the way to lose weight. We've seen in numerous studies that's not great, but as a rough, informative tool to educate, that's really helpful. The amount of people I've seen that are like, oh, I just have a bowl of cereal for breakfast. I'm like, okay, how many calories is that? And they look at the back of the pack. And they're like, oh, okay, that's about 80 calories. I'm like, that's a portion. Now let's weigh your cereal. Oh, that's 6 portions. Okay, so the calorie math is more like this. And the amount of people that go, oh, that's like half my daily intake. And you're like, yeah. It's a rough tool, but it's a useful tool to track, to be informed about your eating. And then you can make informed choice. If you choose that you're like, well, bugger it, that's still your choice. But at least make it an informed one.
Yeah.
Pillar 3, sleep. Try and get 7 to 8 hours a night consistently, with ideally the same bedtime. Little nugget for all those people who do shift work out there. On average, people who do shift work throughout their life lose about 14 total years of life, because that's how big an effect changing your sleep schedule that dramatically can have to your body. Actual data on that. That's not spurious information. But consistent bed and wake times, even if you move from night to day shifts, that's something you can't necessarily avoid. But the closer you can keep your schedule to normal, the better. And ideally, the same sort of 7 to 8 hours volume is an average. Some people do manage on less, some people require more, just like calories. It's an average, that 2,200. A good old Instagram influencer who might have a very high metabolic rate gets away with a few more calories than someone that maybe is low thyroid or less active. Those numbers are all averages. You need to find the balance point for you. And, mental health, okay, the fourth pillar. We should be considering seeing mental health professionals for the vast array of mental issues, like we consider seeing a physio for a hamstring strain. There shouldn't be any taboo about it. If you're going through grief, if you're struggling with depression, if your stress levels are reaching burnout point, seeking a medical health professional's advice should just be the same level of, I've strained the ankle and I don't know the best way to get that back. And even I like this approach. I've seen some wonderful people like there's a great YouTube channel called Cinema Therapy, and one of them's a therapist, one of them's a filmmaker. They talk about elements of psychotherapy, mental health that are shown in films and TV. And he said his favorite clients to work with like, he does a lot of family work and relationships, is I love couples that come to see me before the trouble. They're just looking to optimize their relationship, their communication skills, like seeing a personal trainer to optimize your strength and fitness. We should think about mental health the same way, and I think we're moving in the right direction. I love to see that, but if you are looking for the simples on mental health, mental fitness, keep a good social group of people that you care about and support, and they do in kind to you. We know that people who have more robust social networks, and that doesn't mean volume, but it means quality, have longer lifespans, health spans. It helps people stay active, and social isolation has been shown time and time again to lead to less desirable health outcomes, higher risks of mortality. And we're not designed as human beings to just deal with things alone forever. Some people are more on the introvert spectrum. Some people are on the extrovert spectrum. I don't discount that by any means, but even the most introverted of people tend to have that one person they can at least confide in. Because sometimes we need to be heard, even if that person isn't fixing something for us. We just need to be heard, and that helps.
Yeah. Awesome. So, Michael, what's next for you?
So, what's next for me? I'd like to see what we're doing extend into those multiple pillars of health. I'd like to expand beyond the realms of what we currently offer, which is kind of physiotherapy, sports massage, acupuncture, personal training in the most part, into including more professionals to deal with mental fitness, to do with nutrition, to do with things like potentially blood testing for hormone screening and genetic markers that might make you more at risk of certain conditions. And as such, certain lifestyle change may be more important for you. And sleep as well. I'd love to see that extended scope of practice. And I think that's how we changed most lives for the better in the long term. And I'd love to see it roll out to schools more. I'd love to get involved with schools and help to talk about some of these things with students at an age that are able to comprehend their importance and take on some of the mechanics. I think education is king, and why not do more in an education setting as early in life as you can start making these changes and influencing decisions and helping people make informed choice. Stuff I wish I'd known in my 20s. If someone gave me the script to the four major pillars and how I could work on those and why they're important, I'd be, a decade ahead of where I am now, probably.
Yeah. And where can people find you online?
I don't generally have a big social presence personally. I don't tend to have a personal Instagram or Facebook, but obviously our shawephysio.com website and our Facebook profile on there. I think I've focused more on being local. I think my rule of thumb had always been most people don't want to travel more than about 20 minutes for a physio appointment. So as such, reaching a global audience was probably less important than reaching a local audience. I think I've always enjoyed that one-to-one time with patients. And so rather than some people's approaches, which is brilliant, love it, get a broad social media outlet, reach as many people as you can and influence with education. My approach has been so far on a more local level.
Yeah. So what would you say your catchment area is?
Hoddesdon and Broxbourne are the main two. I'd probably say down as far as Cheshunt and Wormley, Cheshunt and Waltham Cross sort of area. We get some people coming in from Roydon, Harlow, and some from Ware and Hertford. But I'd probably say, it's about a 20-minute drive. If you draw a circle around us, it's about that margin. Most people will choose someone more local to them after that. It's, we are creatures of comfort. We like what is easy and efficient for us. And sometimes that gets in our way of short-term discomfort is often the path to long-term benefit.
Yeah, absolutely. Michael, thank you so much for your time. I've really enjoyed chatting. It's interesting. Obviously, I do work out of your facility as well, and it's by far the longest conversation we've had, and it's been really great. And it's been great to hear more about how you work as well, because I'm very much aligned with how you work, and it's really great to hear.
Absolutely, my friend. It's nice to have a good long conversation with you as well.
Yeah, awesome. So that's all from Michael and me for this week. But don't forget to join me same time, same place next week on the Radical Health Rebel podcast. Thanks for tuning in. Remember to give the show a rating and a review, and I'll see you next time.